welcome to another episode of the Ghuman Experience. I'm the host, Harry Ghuman, and I'm excited for this podcast to be released because we actually got to talk to a local business owner here in Ottawa, Canada, about olive oil. And Mike is an ex-military turned into olive oil connoisseur, very successful business in Ottawa. We had a great time chatting about olive oil, all those little questions that I've always had about where does olive oil come from? How is it produced? How do we purchase it? Were all answered in this podcast. So hopefully you guys enjoy. If you have any feedback, please let me know. Have a beautiful day. Hope you're all staying safe during COVID-19. Take care and enjoy the episode. So where are you from, Mike?
So from Montreal when I was little, and then moved to Petawawa in 2007 when I joined CSOR, when I went into the Army full time. And then pet, and then the last 5-6 years been here in Ottawa.
And so how did you end up in Ottawa then? From CSOR, then you went to?
Yeah, so I applied to go to JTF2 as an assaulter. I did selection in my course in 2013, and then been in Ottawa since 2013.
And do you have family? Is it just yourself or?
Yeah, no, I was by myself. Got married a year and a half ago. Met my wife 3 years ago. So she's from Gatineau. So yeah, we're just laying our roots here in Ottawa. Don't have any plans to move.
So you're basically moved around 2-3 times. You were at Cansoft Cam, then you started your own business. You got married. So that's a lot of change in the past 3 years.
100%. Yeah, it's kind of didn't stop. So, and now with COVID going on, it's not a break time either. I've upped my hours and my output to kind of adjust to this new reality too. But that's kind of the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as small business owners during COVID, it challenges us to see how much we actually want it. And the good thing is, I'm sure that you've been in certain scenarios that when you love what you do, it kind of makes it easier. But some days are obviously harder than others, right? And so walk us through what I'm most intrigued about is that we've had mutual friends who have told us we should connect. And what I'm intrigued about is how has your story evolved into olive oil? So obviously with your work with Cansoft Cam, you've probably traveled all over the world, right? And so how did you go from being at the most elite military level to going into olive oil?
So essentially, I didn't really have any aspirations to be a business person or open my own business, or even in food, to be honest. My family lives in Italy, so we'd go there often, every 2 years when I was a kid, and spend the summers. So that was just kind of our standard summer vacation every 2 years, and go stay at my grandparents' house. And it's kind of the same when I went to the Army. It just wasn't something I wanted to do as a kid, even though my father was in it. I joined the reserves when I was 16, still in high school, and then quit school in 2006, and decided I wanted to do my share and go to Afghanistan. In 2007, went to CSOR. But throughout my time in the Army, it just, something that came out of nowhere. And in 2016, I visited my family again in Italy. And my uncle simply just asked me, he's like, could you sell my olive oil in Canada? And for whatever reason, it just lit something inside me. And I was like, I can make this happen for sure. And again, with no real goal, I just started working on it right away. And then within a few months, brought a pallet over, designed a little label, and found out, where I had to get bottles and corks, and started selling it to people at work, in the locker room. So
the true entrepreneur.
Yeah, it was crazy, and I was doing it for almost 2 years while I was still at the Hill, working full time. Doing it on weekends here in Ottawa. Go and ask a bakery, could I set up a table and just sample some oil? And I got super lucky. I got into a couple of top restaurants like Riviera and 18, kind of earlier on, just by getting out there and meeting people and having people taste my oil. So I was doing that on weekends and at nighttime while I was still working full time.
And I don't think people understand the pace of what you have to go through.
Yeah.
Like you guys are on call 24 hours and you're there, you're gone. And that's got to be a lot of pressure trying to start a business.
It was 2 full-time jobs, and it came to a point where I wouldn't say pressure, but just because it was something that I had to do. It was driving from within. So, it wasn't a chore. And that's how I knew it was worth it, because after a couple months, it wasn't a chore. and it still isn't. I just think about it all day, all night, and I just got to make it happen.
And
Yeah,
so
but then
what part of Italy, before I forget, sorry to cut you off, is what part of
yeah.
Italy is your oil from? Because I know that, petite Italians, you guys have a lot of, you know,
So so if you look at Italy, Rome is in the center. Literally, it's like 26 kilometers just straight north of Rome is the village.
okay.
So that's the village. Lazio is the region, and then each different kind of region can have different flavor profiles for different kinds of olives as well. But just one little point I'd like to clarify is I actually don't have any Italian blood in me. My family moved to Rome in 1961. French Canadian family moved to Rome and then never came back. So that's why I have Italian family there, but they're actually French Canadians that moved and married Italians over there. So
Oh, that's a good story.
yeah.
And so then you were over there, you started obviously talking to your family there about olive oil. How hard was it to import it? So was that process difficult? I've heard great stories. I've heard nightmares. How did that go?
So looking back on it now, it wasn't too difficult, but it was a steep learning curve. That's the only thing. So I did everything myself, from trying to figure out how shipping worked to clearing customs to having a broker do this or that, and then how to bring it from the port to your house and things like that. So, but at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. There's different trade agreements with Canada and Europe. So CETA, a Canadian Europe trade agreement, and so basically it's free duties and free taxes to bring it in. So at least that. Whereas if let's say I bring in Italian olive oil from the United States, well, now I have to pay duties on it but if I buy it directly from Italy or other European countries, then I don't have to pay duty. But there's all these kind of things that I learned in different tariff codes. But I would say it's not that difficult, but there's a lot of friction points potentially that could develop from being, quality control on the Italian side, making sure it gets to where it needs to be, that it's shipped and packed properly. And those are all little things I had to deal with damaged cans and oil dripping or, things like that, or shipments delayed by 2 weeks because the oceans are super rough and then it gets stuck in the Montreal warehouse and doesn't clear customs right away. So there's all these things that you kind of learn, but overall it's not too difficult. No.
So walk me through the process. This is interesting to me because olive oil is, when I think of my top 10 foods to recommend to people for overall health that I know are very safe and have lots of efficacy around them, olive oil is in the top, right? So walk me through, how does the process begin, right? So obviously the olive grows, right? So let people know more about, I think what the goal of having you on was to help people understand the process of olive to, when I'm making my meal, I don't get that love that you get when you're trying that olive oil. And I want to bring people through that experience.
So it starts before the pressing for sure, because they grow in groves, right? And throughout a couple times throughout the year, they have to prep, they prune, they cut the grass because they put out their nets, right? So they have to do a lot of prep. The mill, depending on which kind of mill it is, the mill we use is a small artisanal mill from the little community mill. So it's actually shut down for the whole year. And then in September, late August, they go in, they start cleaning everything, they start getting it up to speed and turning everything back on. But the harvest season is only 6 weeks in this area of the world, right? Roughly. So, October, November, maybe a little bit into December, but that fluctuates. And it also depends on the weather, depends on the bugs, it depends on what's going on. That might start early, it might start later, it might be 4 weeks, it might be 8 weeks. So all that to say is, let's say October, early, the beginning of the season, to late November, maybe first couple weeks of December, end of the season. Well, actually, pop quiz, right? Here's a pop quiz. How many olive varieties are there?
That was one of my questions for you. Yeah. I'm not quite sure.
So there's over 600 different kinds, and then there's sub varieties and stuff. But over 600 different kinds. So it's like thinking it's like, well, they're not all made to grow and be optimal in different parts of the world. They'll be optimal in certain parts, whereas they won't be in other parts. And also, if you pick them early, while others will be ripened near the end of the season. So it's kind of a, you know, the people who work at the mill really have to know their stuff. You pick an olive way too early, well, then it'll be too unripe. It'll be too bitter. It'll be too green. But you can also pick them early enough where you still get enough oil out of it, but that's where all the high amount of health benefits also come from, the greener the olive, right? But because the high antioxidants, the polyphenols, more bitterness and pepperiness, when we taste that in olive oil, that indicates a higher level of healthy antioxidants.
So the more bitter, so let's go. So the more bitter it is, the better it is for antioxidants or polyphenol content.
Okay, so we got to be careful with the words we use. It's not necessarily better, but has a more indicative of a higher level of polyphenols.
Okay, gotcha.
If you want an olive oil that you're just trying to have, you know, maybe on a nice delicate white fish, you don't want super harsh and grass and bitter and peppery, right? So you'll want an olive oil that's suited for that. So it'll be different kind of olive, maybe a little more buttery, a little bit more mild, less harsh and less bitter. But it doesn't mean that it's inferior in quality, right? And that's something where people are like, you got to have the most bitter, peppery oil. Not necessarily. It does mean generally it has higher level of healthy or health benefits, healthy antioxidants. But when we say which one's better, that's more subjective, right? So I always tell people, like, maybe that's not the best word to use. But to go back, so we have this harvest season that begins when you pick the olives, depending on, you know, if it's commercial production or artisanal. So for us, everything, my exclusive products are artisanal from the small batch, from the small mill in Italy where my family lives. Hand-picked olives or hand tools. It's not big trucks going up and down the lanes and then just machines scraping at the tops, or trees having clamps on them and they shake the trees really hard and fast, and that knocks all the olives. Very, especially old world techniques, that's very abrasive and it kind of shocks the trees. Whereas older world techniques is slower, handheld tools, everything's done by hand. They put nets out. You kind of pick up, you pick up all the olives throughout maybe a whole weekend. Then you bring that all to the mill. From when you get to the mill, put it on a little conveyor belt. It kind of shakes it all up, getting rid of the leaves, getting rid of the sticks. Then they get rinsed, and there's a vacuum at the top that gets all the extra leaves and sticks out. From that point to when it finishes and comes out, it's about 40 minutes. Right? Oh, wow. Yeah. So when it goes through the first cleaning / filtration of sticks and leaves, it goes and becomes essentially a paste. And that paste is where they take the whole olive. Actually, that's another fact, little pop quiz. They take the whole olive, and where would you think most of the oil comes from? The nut or the flesh?
I'll say the nut.
Yeah, 100%. So people don't really realize that, but it's the whole olive, right? And most of it comes from the nut. Wow. So once that gets put into a paste, then it goes into a centrifuge, which is a spinning machine, which chemically separates the oil and the water. And then they kind of separate and go into different systems. And then another filtration step for the oil, another vertical centrifuge, and then it comes out into your canister 40 minutes later. That's kind of generally how it goes. And that process is known as cold extraction, as opposed to cold press. In Italy, and I think Europe too, it's very, very serious which terms they're allowed to use. You cannot call a product cold press if they use the product that I talked about, which is the more common product, the cold extraction with the centrifuge. Cold press is actually same beginning. They get this paste, they put it out onto like little metal sheets, and then the hydraulic presses, right? They actually press, and that's where the oil comes out.
And right? Is there a benefit to either one, or is it an efficient?
No, not really. I mean, some people who really know what they're talking about and can taste, when you go with a slower process, you'll be able to taste the difference. There'll be a little more going on. If it's a stone, like the old school technique was the stone that used to crush the olives, as opposed to these blades in the machines, which is the more common way. You know, my uncle, the mill used to do that, and he used to be able to say he could tell the difference. You know, slight little notes, a little more earthy because of the stone. But the problem with the stone is it's very porous, so it's easy to contaminate. You know, the next follow-on batches if they don't really clean them out super hardcore. Because once it goes rancid, then you kind of mess up the whole batch, right? Once the olive oil goes rancid.
So like how many pounds of, one of my major questions, how
Yeah.
many pounds of olives does it take to make like you guys have 750 ml bottle, I think, behind you. So
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple answers. It's something that I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, off the top of my head. But what I do know is that, and my uncle's French, so the word he uses is quintal, so that's a unit of measurement. I don't remember if it's a kilo or if it's 10 kilos. But anyways, one certain measurement, like one kind of like the bucket worth, comes out to 1 liter, right? So essentially, it also depends on the kind of olive and how ripe or unripe it is. The least ripe an olive, the more green and bitter, the less oil is going to be squeezed out of there than something that's at the end of it and it's completely ripened. It's going to be more buttery and perhaps sweet, a lot more oil. So generally, you know, speaking, when my uncle talks to me about his process, because he does his own, he goes to this mill to do his own oil. He says it's generally they try to get 10 to 13% at the beginning of the season of the yield of the oil out of the olives.
oh, wow. Okay.
So it's not much, and that's why it's so expensive as well, right? When you go, and we'll talk about it later, the hierarchy of quality, you need a lot less to make more because you can use heat and you can use solvents / chemicals to extract more out of the olive as opposed to just like mechanical means. But that's something that we could definitely chat about later. That's important, I think, to know is the hierarchy of quality within oils.
You get it in, and then how does it store? So how would you store it? Is it glass? It's obviously not wood. It's
So they get stored in large steel containers, or kind of like I don't know, if you go to a brewery, you know, the big steel vats and everything, it's the same kind of, you know, anything that doesn't oxidize and anything that doesn't allow air or light, and you can control, have controlled environment on it. So when I receive them from Italy, I get them in 25-liter containers.
Okay.
And 5-liter containers, but they're all in kind of like a steel container. At the end of the day, the 3 enemies, heat, light, and oxygen, the 3 enemies for olive oil. Keep it away from heat, so away in your pantry or in your cellar. Normal room temperature is fine, as long as it's not, let's say, over a stove, right? Or right next to your stove. Like you see a lot of people showing off their kitchen. That's kind of a problem. If you're using it for just a cooking, you know, for making your meal, not a big deal. But as a storage space, it's no good. Light, so light's going to oxidize as well. That's why darker bottles are better if you keep it out. You know, if you keep it in a cupboard, doesn't matter, right? Because it's away from light anyways. But if you keep it on your table because the bottle's nice, or on your counter because the bottle's nice, it really should be a dark bottle, right? So when you go to grocery stores and you see clear bottles that you know are there for more than a few weeks, that's a problem. In the store, we have the mini bottles that are clear, but those, you know, those really rotate through quite quick. So that's not a problem. But the problem is when you have a bottle like this, right, and that's been on a shelf for 6 months and hasn't moved, and it's a clear bottle, high chances that it's going to oxidize and it's going to go rancid.
So then you get it in those 25-liter vats, right?
That's
So
right.
from the time it's picked to on your shelf there, what would be just like I know it'd be hard to give us an exact, but what's an approximation?
No, it's not too. So there's a few different things. So for example, the last harvest or the last batch I brought in March was from end of October, maybe early November.
Okay.
And I got that in March just because that's backfilling me for the year. My first order I received in December of the October crushing, right?
Oh, wow.
So
That's pretty fresh.
yeah, no, it's as fresh, and there are some issues with bringing it in right away.
Okay.
Normally, you leave it a few months in those big vats, the big ones, like the 1,000 liter ones, and let it settle because these aren't 100% filtered, so there will be sediments at the bottom of my cans, right? So if you buy a 5 liter can, or when I fill my containers up from my cans, there's always a level of sediment, which is just from the olive, right? Little bits of flesh and so. But if you let it sit for about 2-3 months, then when you transfer it, well, then you don't have that sediment in your oil.
Okay.
But because I don't want to waste time, I bring it over right away. So I have the freshest harvest possible. I normally have it, let's say second week of December, and it was maybe the end of October. Yeah, so November, maybe 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. So it's not too bad. But then when I backfilled my second half of the order, which arrived in March, which is supposed to last me for the rest of the year until December, which now I probably have too much because of COVID. But so that was in the containers in Italy, ready to go. My uncle packed them all at the same time, but they were just sitting on a pallet waiting until April or kind of like February until when we sent them over from Italy.
Is it like wine? The longer it sits a little bit, the better it tastes, or is it just dependent on what type of level of olive oil you're getting?
So not really. It's always best to have it fresh
Gotcha.
for a few reasons. Taste and quality will decrease with time no matter what you do. Even in perfect conditions, it will decrease with time. You have to kind of visualize it as it's a fresh pressed juice. But I guess wine to a degree because it's from grapes, but because of its processes and the alcohol, it's different. This olive oil, all it is the olives that are crushed, right? And the oil is extracted from that paste. So the fresher you have it, the more health benefits and the better it tastes. Depending on how you store it and the resiliency of the oil, so kind of jumping around all over the place, but
It all makes sense to the everyday. Like it's making a lot of sense to me. So yeah.
The more bitter and pepperiness / the more polyphenols and antioxidants, the higher the level of health benefits, but also the more resilient that oil is. Okay. So it's going to last longer, right? Because it has more antioxidants. It has, as opposed to something with less, it'll oxidize quicker, right?
Right? You have
that's
more
what antioxidants do, right? The free radicals that kind of destroy things and oxidize, the antioxidants kind of fight against those. So the more there are, the less oxidization. However, having said that, generally speaking, I think 2 years is totally fine for an oil that you know exactly when it was made and a high quality oil that's protected well. I've had oil, my mom still has oil from my uncle that's 3 years old and it still hasn't gone. But you could tell definitely a difference than, maybe 6 months after she got it for sure. Even our olive oil, a year after when it's made, you will be able to tell a small difference, especially someone who knows what they're looking for. Having said that, most people, it's like you got to be a sommelier level, to be trained to be able to detect those differences. And that kind of leads into the third enemy, oxygen, right? So when we store it at home, I have a 5-liter container that I put into one of these metal things. These are 15 liters. They're called Fusties, F-U-S-T-I. We have a 5-liter one at home. So what that does reduces heat, light, and oxygen from entering the system, right? So I fill my daily use container out of one of those, reducing the amount of oxygen into the whole system, only to a small amount. If you use a big bottle, let's say this 750 ml bottle, right? And it takes you a year to go through this much, but you use it every day. You're adding new oxygen all the time fresh oxygen to the system, it's going to go rancid quicker than if you only use it a few times a month, but not adding new oxygen, and it takes you a year. You know what I mean? So that's something that, depends on, if you know you're not going to use it a lot, put it into a smaller container, right? If you buy a 5-liter can or a 3-liter can, put it into a small container. Doesn't matter what kind. My grandma in Italy has a little clear glass container, but she keeps it in her cupboard at all times.
And those spray bottles, those ones where you can fill with your own, does that work? Does that
Yeah,
work well? Just to put
100%. Yeah, it's same principles. You're removing a daily use portion of a larger amount, so you're protecting that larger amount. And the spray is pretty handy, to be honest, to get a nice even coating, let's say on a pan or over some veggies or something.
Do you sell that machine? Do you sell that spray machine?
No, we don't. I'm still learning, what works and what doesn't work, but I also don't want to become too much gadgets in the store.
Yeah.
But it is something a couple of people have asked, and maybe if I find a high quality one, not one that you would find at HomeSense, let's say, then potentially I would bring it in, because it is handy. If it's a good high quality one, it can be handy.
Well, it's just a good tool, right? It's just like, to get olive oil, like if you're going to buy a good product, you want to make sure you're storing it, because from what you're saying, the storing is an aspect that's quite important to the way that you're going to be able to keep the nature of that quality of product, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And I think that, it being a power food, it's one of those things that it's kind of like how I tell myself and my clients, only eat organic berries if you can, because they're the most sprayed crop in the world. So pay the extra couple of dollars because you're going to get less pesticides in there. So it's kind of one of those things of, if you're going to get the good olive oil, let's keep it.
Yeah. What's that? The clean 15 and the dirty 12 or something like that?
That's right. And then berries are some of the dirtiest sprayed. So, okay. So then in terms of the olive oil, so now it's there. So now walk me through, there's the controversy with cooking with olive oil. I'd like to know, because obviously you deal with some great chefs, right?
Yeah.
You've also developed some good relationships with some of the best in the city. And, I've seen mixed reviews about it. And
so let me ask you this. What's the negative?
Well, so for me, when I use my olive oil, I'll still cook with it, but I use it on low temp, like low to medium. Like I just tell people low to medium, or I'll just use my oven and I don't use any oil to warm it up. But usually I use a lot of olive oil for marinades and whatnot. But a lot of them will say that if you heat it up, you denature the oil, right?
So there's a lot of truths, but it's also, heat it up to what level, right? What causes that? Is there a threshold, right? And so the answer is, it can always kind of change depending on the olive, and everything has their own characteristics, how it's been stored, if it's an extra virgin oil or if it's a blended oil, so all that to say is, extra virgin oil as a general category is totally safe to cook. Think about in Italy, right? People that make their own olive oil, that's what they use all day, all night. Now
always kept to that note of, I keep my life simple, because a lot of people say use coconut oil, use this, use that. I'm like, you know what? Olive oil is still the oldest oil in the world and perfectly safe, and they're cooking with it.
There are times not to cook with it, though. For example, so let's go back a bit. Well, I don't want to cook too hot. Well, what's the threshold, right? So generally speaking, smoke point, and that's the point where visually you can see smoke, but also health quality degrades, and actually you kind of reverse it and become trans fats, because everything breaks down and actually becomes harmful to a degree. It's not really harmful because we're consuming such a small amount, but if you were consuming a liter of it, completely different, right? But when you're doing a drizzle or maybe a quarter cup and it smokes, that's definitely gone too far and wouldn't be worth keeping that oil. However, that temperature is, depending on the research you look, between, about 420 degrees Fahrenheit. So what does that mean on my stove top, right? Well, that means medium to medium high, okay? So if I'm searing a steak, way too hot, right? That for sure will smoke. So what we use at home is avocado oil, because it has a mild flavor. You can also use, what's that, not the butter in India there, ghee.
Ghee.
So you could use that too, lard, other things like that, but you need something that's stable. Below that, if you're doing your eggs, if you're sauteing greens, if you're prepping onions on, medium, high to medium to low, olive oil is excellent. And the other problem is in North America, we cook too hot because we're impatient and we're not doing it properly.
We
We're
gotta
going too
move.
fast, right?
Yeah.
So if we cook a little slower and it takes, 7 minutes or whatever to do the onions, as opposed to when I normally do it and I kind of fry them and it starts burning in 2 minutes, well, then the oil, it'll work properly. And not only that, the health benefits translate into your veggies, right? And they become, and in some cases, the bioavailability increases in that when they're mixed with the olive oil.
It's something that people forget about, is that when you have a good fat with those fatty soluble nutrients,
Yeah, exactly.
the absorption of that food, which means that having fats with veggies is actually a good thing. And if so that's something we recommend. And that's what, a lot of the finer olive oils that you use, like if you finish off your food, right? Like let's say you did make a salad and you have infused dressings, right? That just add a ton of flavor, but also add that good essential fats that you need along with the polyphenols, and it adds really good flavor and absorption of the nutrients. It's something that
there's a book called Eating on the Wild Side. So the only thing I remember from it are two things. Beta carotene from carrots, they showed a graph. On their own, when you eat them, they're down here. On their own with olive oil, they're here. On their own with olive oil, but roasted, bioavailability goes to here, right?
Oh.
It was pretty, so they were, in the fat soluble and this and that, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. It makes a lot of sense. And then the other crazy thing was blueberries, the vitamins, I don't remember, the amount of vitamins that we could absorb were highest when they were frozen and then microwaved. That's the only other fact that I remember.
Microwave, because you would think microwave is killing it, but that's
but she, she was I think it was a woman. I can't remember the name, but she huge researcher, right? The whole book was about her research, and those are the two. But the beta carotene from the carrots and the olive oils is what really stuck with me, because they'd increase the bioavailability with the cooking. I guess to go back also 2 seconds, we talked about cooking with the oil, but this nice high-end finishing oil that's pretty expensive, right? This is, especially from the restaurant's point of view, used as a finisher. Almost all my clients, the same thing. All the customers use this as a finishing because it's so tasty and it is quite expensive to kind of just plow through it.
What does it mean? So give us an example of a finisher. Give us an example of what you would see as a finisher. Are you talking salad dressing? Are you talking?
So 100%. So a nice little, 2 or 3 portion oil to 1 portion, a nice high quality balsamic with a little bit of salt. That's a way to have a nice simple salad dressing, a vinaigrette, right? A way to finish it as well is, let's say you have some of the restaurants, they have crudo, and then they finish with a nice drizzle on the end of the presentation to add the little bit of texture and taste, right? And contrast. Another way would be, let's say you're doing roasted veggies or something. You can prep them, right, and lather them, and then put your spices and put them in the oven. Then when you take them out, you can also do a quick drizzle before you serve. Same with the balsamic. And the most fun way to kind of, as a finisher for me, is on a slice of pizza. I do every day that I have pizza. I take my oil and I put it on all the time. It's just an SOP for me now. Even crappy pizza from the grocery store that's frozen before, they're still decent now, but it makes a huge difference, right? It brings it to another level.
And so you're saying you've got your cooking ones, you've got your olive. Okay, so that's good. So we've got all that stuff now, and then and we know how to store it. So then you've got your balsamic vinegars, which you're known for. So walk us through a little bit of history. I know I don't want to take up too much of your time, but walk us through a little bit of a history of how does the balsamic work? Where does it come from? How does it all work?
So we have in my store, we have my exclusive small batch oils. There you go. From where my family lives in Italy. This is really what separates me from every other store with all our great flavored products. Yep. I use a different supplier than anyone else here in Ottawa, but these kind of stores exist all over North America. Okay. This is what sets me apart. And the other thing is my balsamic. This is
Okay.
a small producer that I found myself when I was in Italy 3 years ago. I bring it in very small quantities, sell to many of the same top restaurants. Both of these you won't find elsewhere in North America. That's how small they are, right? Small batch, artisanal, not commercially produced. Balsamic vinegar that you buy in grocery stores, right? So this bottle is $30, 200 mils. What you can get in grocery stores for 200 mils, maybe $6, right? Depending on the quality. The quality is a function of the amount, is the ratio of the ingredients. Grape must and wine vinegar, right? So grape must is very similar to when you start wine process, right? You take the grapes and you churn them up, and they kind of boil it down, and that's what they get the must. So that's the majority of the ingredients that gives the thickness and sweetness. The wine vinegar is the balance of and the sharpness to add to the vinegar. They use aged red wine vinegar. What you get in grocery stores is almost all cheap red wine vinegar, then some concentrated grape must, and more often than not, caramel coloring to hide the red of the red wine vinegar, because it's 90% red wine vinegar, and then caramel flavoring or / sugars, right, to increase the sweetness. This product is 80% non-concentrated grape must, so tying back into the artisanal, part of it, and 20% aged red wine vinegar. So it has a really nice depth and sweetness to it, aged 3 years, using super strict controlled techniques and methods. Not to mention, like most of these products that you find in grocery stores, speaking of balsamics, they're aged to the minimum threshold, which is 60 days, right? And super sharp and liquidy because it's primarily cheap red wine vinegar, because it's huge commercial. They don't, they're making money. They don't care. But once you taste this, you're like, I had no idea. Same with tasting the olive oil for the first time.
Is that your $280 bottle?
So this is a different level. So all these products, and the same with all these back here, right? They all have red wine vinegar, or in white balsamic, white wine vinegar. That classification is called condimento, right? They're produced traditionally, but they're not traditional balsamics. Traditional balsamics are very, very strict and super controlled, but it's this bottle here. So there's an example of one.
Yeah.
Traditional balsamic has to be 100% grape must, so no wine vinegar, right? Has to be aged 12, 18, or 25 years at a minimum. It has to be bottled in this bottle, or there's an older shape that's slightly more narrow, but it has to be this shape bottle, and it has to be by the consortium, this is the seal of the consortium.
Okay.
They're the only ones who can go into each producer's place, inspect, and tell them, yeah, you can go, you have 300 bottles, boom, and then they label it and they approve it. So
wow.
You can't have a traditional balsamic unless it's in a bottle like this that's aged 12, 18, or 25 years.
Okay.
The reason why this is $280 is because this is from my small artisanal producer, their highest and oldest grapes and their highest quality grape, their vineyards. And it's produced traditionally. So it's a very strict controlled method.
And so are there any restaurants in Ottawa using that one currently?
Not on their menus.
No.
I've gifted it to a couple of the restaurants that I do business with, a couple that we do a good amount of business with, and they're super pumped about it because when they taste it, they're like, okay, this is ultra legit. There are a lot of restaurants that use this one and my oil.
Gotcha.
Riviera, Becta 18, Whalesbone, North and Navy, Matty, Les Fougères for a point. Rabbit Hole, Eldon's on Preston, on Bank Street.
A really good local, so it's local on top of local.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
and you won't find it anywhere else in North America. My two exclusive ones, I mean, because I bring it in myself.
Gotcha. And you're located in Ottawa, so you've been in business how long now? 2 years, you said?
So the store, we've been open since September 2018.
Okay.
But prior to that, I was doing it for part-time since August 2016.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we're almost like 3.5-ish, let's call it, years in, including the part-time and the store being open.
And then, so you're located where? So let people know where you're located.
1283 Unit B, Wellington Street West. So kind of near Parkdale and Wellington. Yeah. Really cool neighborhood, Wellington West. A lot of cool shops, independent restaurants, and independent shops here. Tons of people come here for the really cool vibe of the neighborhood. We have a tasting boutique in the store, which now we're kind of not running. But basically, you come in and you can taste everything that we have, except for this guy.
I was just gonna say, except the paying fee. And
But
so, sorry, but
yeah,
and so then what you're doing for doing COVID-19 is you're doing obviously mail order, so people can go online, order their product, or they can give you a call, give you their credit card, or is it just online only?
so definitely don't prefer the call and credit card, just
Okay.
because that way there's issues with fraud. I can't get there's no insurance coverage that way for
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
what we have a really nice online store. You can purchase everything through there. We can do curbside pickups at 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons / morning. And we also do free deliveries in Ottawa and Gatineau. So Tuesdays and Thursdays we go, Mondays and Thursdays we go out and do our deliveries.
Okay. So and then in terms of so what's the phone number? Give us your social media tags.
Yeah. So
Yourself.
website,
Plug now.
yeah, the website is www.aureliusfoodco.com. So AURELIUS foodco.com. Same for Instagram and Facebook at Aurelius Food Co. And just go on there. Everything is linked to be able to go to the website, or you can purchase off Facebook as well. Once you get to over $30, you get that free shipping / delivery in Ottawa Gatineau that auto populates, or you could select curbside pickup.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking your time. We know it's a different time here in COVID-19, but I'm excited we had you on. You know, you're the story, right? Ex-military, you know, starting your local business out of your back of your car, selling to
Yeah,
your friends, and now look where you are. You're dealing with some of the best restaurants, and you gave me a lot of information about olive oil, and I appreciate that. And hopefully our clients and more Ottawatonians get to know more about your business. And I think you had said that you wanted to offer a discount code or something like that to
yeah,
our
yeah, for
viewers.
sure.
This will air in about a week or two.
So we'll just set it up as Harry 10,
Awesome.
HARI 10, and that'll give 10% off to your listeners if they put that in as a discount code at the end of their checkout experience there. And yeah, more than happy to share any information. We probably jumped around a little bit all over the place, but there's tons of information out there. And once I get going, I just keep talking, and that's kind of what we do in the store. Right, the education and the service piece is really important for us.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to get a tasting in person once we go back to the new normal, and hopefully we can do something for private for our clients to kind of come in and get as well. So I think that's going to be I think that's where small business owners like us shine, is that one-on-one connection. We know our clients, we know them by name, and that's an experience that clients can really enjoy moving forward.
Excellent, man.
Thank you for your time. Hope you enjoy your day. Stay safe, and we'll be talking to you shortly.
Appreciate it, Harry.
Thank you.
Thanks.